Alex Heath, The Verge. Meta says Apple updated its App Store rules to require in-app purchases for social media boosts to grow its business, quote unquote, while undercutting others in the digital economy. Related, Emma Roth, The Verge. Spotify says Apple's behavior is, quote unquote, choking competition after Apple rejected its proposed audiobook purchasing process 3 times for breaking App Store rules. I took notes. It's a new process for me. Created today. Oh. Of course my notes didn't sync properly. Why would they? Why should I expect them to? Look, I'm sure everything Meta and Spotify are saying is, at its sort of base, factually accurate. It shouldn't surprise anybody that Apple will do whatever it is able to advantage its own offerings against offerings from any business that it views as a competitor. Spotify example is the most direct and easiest one. Spotify charges money to end users like me for access to the celestial jukebox. So does Apple. They're in the same business. Why wouldn't Apple do, quite frankly, any number of things in order to make its celestial jukebox service better, easier, more affordable, more available, whatever quality you want to use to describe it, than Spotify's? Meta's is slightly different. On the surface, Meta, Snap, Twitter, social media products have premium tiers where users pay money. I pay for Twitter Blue because I use Twitter a lot. And the update to Apple's App Store rules say that that money, that if I were to fire up Snapchat and then want to subscribe to Snap's premium offering, whatever, features or capabilities that provides, that Apple wants a cut. This is why Netflix didn't have a sign-up flow in its iOS app for ages. Ultimately, though, somewhere in a room, the right person at Netflix and the right person at Apple had a conversation, and let's face facts, Apple chose not to enforce its rules on Netflix any longer, and now you can sign up for Netflix on an iOS device. This is the way the game is played, and I think the frustrating but the right logical place to have this argument is, what exactly is it that Apple is providing in selling devices that run iOS? Is it a computer in the sense that people of my vintage grew up perceiving a computer to be, which is more or less a combination of independent components with an operating system and a driver model that strings all of those hardware components together such that applications can run on top of that operating system and provide the user with functionality while also providing enough transparency through the operating system layer in order to, in some cases, get access to the hardware, or at the very least, for an application written by a third party to get equivalent capability as first-party applications. This is a debate that has gone on as long as computing has existed, closed versus open. And I don't think anyone can reasonably make the case that Apple has not seen extraordinary success by hewing to a closed model or a more closed model. It's certainly open. It certainly makes a tremendous amount of programmability through APIs and frameworks available to any individual or organization on Earth. It just carves out this line item that says, we want our piece of rent if you run a business with recurring revenue streams or non-recurring revenue streams, quite frankly, on top of our platform. People can be upset about that, but we're not dealing with the same definition of a computer or a machine than we were in 1985. We're dealing with machines where there are expectations that authentication is done through biometry, scans your face or your fingerprint in order to prove that you are the authenticated user. It has the ability to initiate a payment using your stored payment credentials. It has persistent connectivity to the internet. It has a GPS radio and all manner of other components such that the device knows where it is on the planet effectively at all times. No machine in 1985 had any of those things. And so I think if I were to make Apple's case, a component of it would be the stakes for compromising this system are drastically higher than they were 40 years ago. Ergo, we need to exercise greater control than you might otherwise think is required for a computing platform. And I think the popular sort of useful term to describe this difference is they provide an appliance, not so much a machine. You look around the appliances in any home in the developed world, there are some circumstances where if a piece of that appliance fails, a component, you can go to the hardware store. You can get exactly the same piece, manufactured by an entity that has no knowledge of what brand of washer or dryer or refrigerator you might have in your home, and you can insert it into that appliance and you fixed it, right? That's a more open system. The washer, dryer, the refrigerator, it doesn't know where your kid is right now. Your Apple Watch does. There's an Apple Watch strapped to your child, it knows where they are. That is highly privileged information. And so the notion that Apple ought to hold itself to the same level of openness and interoperability as it did in 1985, I just don't think it holds much water today. That said, rent seeking is, I'm not a legal scholar, I believe it's against the law. Problem is, you have to go and have that adjudicated, and that takes time. So I don't know what they're going to do, but all of these businesses, the Metas, the Spotifys, the Twitters, the whoever, they're going to complain, quite frankly, because it's the only recourse they have until they're big enough that they can get the right person at Apple in a room and cut a deal the way Netflix did. Time for a set. Joe Rosignol, Mac Rumors. After Apple rolls out its new App Store ad units, prominent developers complain about gambling ads appearing in their app listings with no way to stop them. Just a moment ago, I was arguing in Apple's corner. Now, not so much. Advertising, this feels like a sort of a law of nature, right? Or a razor, something like that. Advertising will always fall to the lowest acceptable, socially acceptable thing to be advertised. Before I was born, maybe right around when I was born, if you were to watch Formula One racing, which is seeing a significant surge in popularity in the United States, almost every racing team, when you looked at the cars going around the track, some of the most prominent advertising was tobacco products and alcohol products. If you watch American football today, the most prominent advertising is for beer. And in my anecdotal experience as someone who is subjected to seeing American football as a part of my day job, gambling advertisements have seen a huge entrance into that advertising space. So it doesn't surprise me at all that when you go into the App Store on an iOS device today and you search for something, that one of the most prominent forms of advertising you see is for gambling. I don't really feel like trying to make the case for Apple's necessity of operating its App Store with the same sort of business structure as, say, Google's search engine or any other search engine, which is to say, advertisers can buy placement based on the terms that the user enters. I don't really feel like making that case. I can see where you can make that case, but quite frankly, and any Apple fan worth their salt only trots this razor out very sparingly. This wouldn't happen if Steve were alive. I do not believe that Jobs would allow anyone around his executive table to convince him that they should take money for ad placement in an environment where users are trying to do the thing which further entrenches them as Apple customers. Instead, what's happening is, in order to take that money off the table. One could argue you may see more people say, I don't really love using an iOS device. Yes, there are things that keep me here, but every time I go look for a new piece of software, if I don't have a hyperlink which takes me directly to the appropriate listing, I just, on my device, go into the App Store and I say, as I did the other day, show me software that will help me determine where I need to stand in order to be in the path of sunrise or sunset in order to take an optimal photograph somewhere on the planet. Golden hour, look it up if you're not familiar. The first screen's worth of results are paid placements. All it takes is someone who doesn't really build an app with the right ethic, which in this case might be one which says, we're going to take the location information, which we get when you use the app, because you have to know where on the earth you are in order to understand the angle of the sun. We're going to sell that data to whoever the fuck we feel like. I don't want that. I don't want to buy that app. I want to give the app that doesn't do that my money. And it's more difficult to do that when there's paid placement in the store. So, yeah, keep complaining, keep hammering on this, because while not necessarily a lot of hope that anyone should have that it will change, it's the only thing you can do is be that squeaky wheel. Time for another set. Alphabet. Alphabet reports Q3 revenue up 6% year over year from 65.1 billion to 69 billion, 13.91 billion in net income, down from 18.94 year over year. 186,779 employees, up from 150,028 year over year. Stock drops 5%. Related, John Schwartz, MarketWatch, Alphabet reports Google ad sales of 54.5 billion in Q3, up from 53.1. Blah, 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 blah. Abner Lee, 9 to 5 Google. Alphabet reports its other bets unit lost 1.16 billion in Q3, up 25% from 1.29 on 200 million in revenue. Related, Todd Spangler, Variety, YouTube's ad revenue dropped 1.9% year over year to 7.07 billion in Q3, below expectations of 7.42 and representing its first year over year drop in at least 2 years. There's a whole pile of numbers there. Only one that's interesting to me is the headcount number. From today to a year in the past, Alphabet, which includes Google and YouTube and everybody, added 186 minus 50. What is that? 50, 60, 70, 80, 86. Bad at arithmetic. But I'm getting better because I have a child who needs to learn. So I'm learning with them. Added 36,000 people to its headcount. This is a thing that a lot of time was spent on in this week's All In Pod. Maybe it was last week, I can't recall. If that's not proof of there was a lot of money sloshing around in the global economy over the last 3 years in order to try and help with the pandemic, We can set aside the idea of what might have helped more with the pandemic. When I went to work at Microsoft, which admittedly was 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, the total Redmond campus was around 35,000 people. I'm sure I'm wrong on the margins there. The notion that Alphabet needed an additional 35,000 people in the last year is bananas. It's utterly bananas. I'm sure they need some number of people, but if that doesn't show you, particularly when combined with otherwise sort of middling or unremarkable revenue growth, income growth, YouTube missing expectations for the first time in 2 years, at least 2 years. You take on 35, 36,000 new people, and you don't have commensurate, or what one ought to argue, a commensurate amount of increase in business output. Why did you hire them all? Did you hire them in order to take them off the table so that your competitors couldn't hire them? Maybe. Did you hire them because you get to write off the cost of paying them as much as you pay them from your, tax returns, as much of a tax return as a business like Alphabet actually has? I don't know. But that's a wild number to me. And I look forward to seeing what that number is a year from now, or not even a year from now, 90 days from now. That'll be interesting. Time for another set. Sheila Dang, Reuters. Internal research. Twitter has been losing heavy tweeters who tweet 3 to 4 times a week since the pandemic began, masked by an overall growth in DAUs. This is, it's interesting to, as a footnote, maybe, my understanding is that the deal for Elon to purchase Twitter is closing, Friday, something like that, like it's imminent, that Twitter becomes a private company. These are the sorts of numbers that are going to get even harder to get in the outside world. And moreover, these are the numbers that will be most interesting to Elon and whatever management team is in place, say, 6 months from now, in order to try and evolve Twitter into a more effective business. If the research does indeed show that users who are publishing to Twitter 3 to 4 times a week have been leaving since the pandemic began, the part of the iceberg that's above the surface is obvious. That's not good. But the part that's below the surface, the part that becomes significantly more relevant when Twitter stops being a public company and DAUs stops being, or other similar metrics, stop being the thing that determines the share price, and therefore, by proxy, the thing that steers the executive team's decisions, or at least influences, puts its finger on the scale. Are those the users Twitter needs? In order for Twitter as a business to become more successful, Gruber had a great phrase, which I will now butcher, from the other day. Twitter has the single worst ratio of media attention to business performance of any business in its category. Like, its ability to make money relative to how fundamental it is to a significant chunk of at least the media landscape. You'll note, you watch traditional television, you don't see somebody's Facebook username or somebody's Snap username or somebody's Instagram username. You see a Twitter handle. I would argue that the people who tweet 3 to 4 times a week may not be the people that Twitter needs in order to be successful. Some of them, absolutely. There are, chaotic neutral to chaotic good actors, a certain sub-quadrant of the character matrix, who Twitter absolutely needs. I'd like to think I am among them. I try to be positive. I try to be random and authentic on Twitter. I don't spend a lot of my energy being, at least what I perceive to be, abusive or counterproductive or anything like that. Toxic. And so, obviously, there's no real conclusion that one can draw here, but I just want to plant that flag and say maybe there's a significant percentage of people who tweet 3 to 4 times a week that actually need to leave the platform in order for Twitter as a business to grow and evolve. I don't know. Time for another set. Microsoft. Microsoft reports Q1 revenue up 11% year over year to 50.1 billion, net income down year over year to 17.6 billion. Office commercial revenue up 7% year over year. LinkedIn up 17% year over year. Stock drops 5%. Related, Frederic Lanois, TechCrunch. Microsoft says GitHub has a $1 billion ARR and 90 million plus active users, up from a reported 200 to 300 million ARR and 28 million active users when Microsoft acquired GitHub in 2018. Also related, Taylor Soper, GeekWire. Microsoft's cloud revenue grew 24% year over year to 25.7 billion, including 20.3 billion from Intelligent Cloud, up 20% year over year, driven by Azure and other cloud services, up 35% year over year. Also related, Tom Warren, The Verge. Microsoft reports Q1 Windows OEM revenue down 15% year over year, devices revenue up 2% year over year, Xbox hardware revenue up 13%, and Xbox content and services revenue down 3%. Also related, Tom Warren, The Verge. Satya Nadella says more than 20 million people have streamed games using Xbox Cloud Gaming, double the 10 million figure that Microsoft shared in April of 2022. Whole bunch of numbers. I mean, hard not to be bullish about Microsoft right now. Damn. 11% year over year top line growth. LinkedIn growing 17%. GitHub becoming $1 billion run rate business with almost 100 million users. Game streaming doubling its user figure just from April. The Cloud revenue up 25%. The only sad story is a sign of the times. Windows OEM revenue down 15. I mean, I think this is a thread that you're going to see run through a lot. Certainly other stories today from my quick read through before I started. End user devices is not where the money's being made. It's not to say there's no money in it, but the areas for growth are in services which require global scale and therefore require extreme efficiency and interoperability between them. And Microsoft's really good at that. They were really good at that in a previous era, but more of the sort of interop existed within its own product portfolio. Microsoft and Office, or sorry, Windows and Office, Windows and Internet Explorer, those sorts of things. Whereas today, they're more comfortable running services which are fundamentally platform agnostic. Nobody cares what type of device you use to utilize LinkedIn and get value from it. Nobody cares what operating system you use in order to get value from GitHub. Let those businesses be great at being open to all comers, which is what they're doing. And then look for areas where you can do things better because you're Microsoft than your competitors can. Game streaming is something the company's absolutely running away with, despite the fact that streaming media is arguably Netflix's ball, right? Say what you will about Hulu finally getting its act together and Disney Plus coming onto the scene and Apple coming onto the scene. Interactivity being streamed over the wire is something that Netflix has not really been able to invest in or has chosen not to. Whereas Microsoft, by contrast, has said, well, we have all the relationships with game developers because we've been in the console business for 20 years at this point. How old is the first Xbox? I don't know. But gaming on Windows, it's older than I am. So getting to a place where the network is good enough that all you really need is a controller and a display that's connected to the network, and you can have a gaming experience. What's the number here? Xbox hardware revenue is up 13%. I don't imagine that number is going to stay that way for very long. But that's okay because the number of people who are willing to dip their toes into the water of maybe I already have an Xbox, maybe I have a PlayStation, maybe I have a Nintendo Switch, maybe I don't have any of these things, but all I have to do is either install an app on my smart television set or open a web browser on the aging iMac that's in my home, and I can play state-of-the-art games. Sounds like a fantastic experience. Is it flawless? I'm sure it's not flawless. I'm sure that there are issues and that the performance is not good enough for some cohort of those who would describe themselves as gamers. But if what I want to do is sit down and play Flight Simulator, I don't want to have to go buy an Xbox to do that. I already have a Windows PC that I built myself in order to play games. I built it in, I don't know, 2018, 2017, something like that. And quite frankly, I'm thankful that it would appear that I won't have to continue to invest in that hardware in order for my child or myself or anybody else in my family to play video games and to have the social experience that makes video games in 2022 great. For me to be able to sit down and play Fortnite and have, or better example, because it's one that my son is super into right now, Sea of Thieves. You're a pirate. You captain a ship. You do pirate things. My brother is also a big fan of this game. My son and my brother live on opposite sides of the continent from each other. So there's an opportunity for the two of them to do something that they both enjoy and to have a synchronous voice call or maybe even a synchronous video call at the same time for them to be pirates together, to go play pirate, despite the fact that there's a continent separating the two of them. That's the beauty of video games. That's why this is a thing worth investing in and a thing worth caring about. It's not, all due respect to those of you, for people who want to play Call of Duty competitively. Like, they're a different breed of cat. And quite frankly, like, more power to them. I don't have like a moral judgment to make on that. Simply put, I don't want to have to own a whole multi-hundred-dollar, $1,500 appliance or machine in order to facilitate my son and my brother playing pirates together. So keep rocking out, Microsoft. Keep doing what you're doing. It's great. Time for another set. Berber Gin, Wall Street Journal. Sources: A16's flagship crypto fund lost around 40% of its value in H1 2022, above the 10 to 20% losses at rival funds. A16 has dramatically slowed crypto investments. Blockchains greater than crypto. All of the smoke, or to be fair, much of the smoke around anything built on a blockchain seems to smell like money. I'm trying to carry the metaphor there, to most people. Buy a digital certificate that proves your ownership of this 15-second clip of one of the sweetest Michael Jordan dunks of all time. Is there value there? I don't know. What's a Babe Ruth rookie card worth? In theory, it's worth a lot of money. Problem is, to who? The TAM, the total addressable market of people who will pay, let's pick a number out of thin air, $1 million for a piece of paper that has Babe Ruth's photograph and name, other associated details printed on it as a symbol of his greatness as a character in a sport that's still played today. Maybe that's worth $1 million, but the funnel to find that person who will give you $1 million for that piece of paper is, I'm speculating here, brutal. A whole bunch of people at the top of the funnel who agree, in theory, that Babe Ruth's rookie card is worth $1 million. Then you get to like the midpoint of the funnel, which are people who have $1 million. Then you get a little further down the funnel. People who have $1 million and are so into baseball that they value the symbol of a baseball player in the form of a piece of paper with like material amounts of money attached to it. Then you get to the very bottom of the funnel, which is people who believe that baseball cards are worth material amounts of money, who have $1 million and who are into baseball, who will then spend $1 million to be the hodler of a Babe Ruth rookie card. I just don't think there are that many people. And by the same token, to like jump out of this analogy, I don't think there are that many people who will believe that one of the first crypto punks or one of the first insert NFT project here, or go back to the first example, the NFT that, according to some business, according to the NBA, according to Michael Jordan's estate, nobody knows who's actually agreeing to this, value the 15-second video clip at a certain US dollar price. Because let's remember, whenever we're talking about anything that's related to cryptocurrencies, despite all of the noise around how what we need to do is get to a place where you're not ultimately falling back to local fiat currency. And I agree, there are absolutely use cases for currency which can be used to buy food and shelter, which should not be controlled, which is another way to say backed and provided, by a state. I think that should exist in the world. I think we do need to get to a place where that's possible, where I can hold a currency either by buying it with US dollars or by buying it with some other set of assets that I can then go spend in Rome to buy a cappuccino, or in Fiji to rent an apartment, or in British Columbia to send my child to university. Like, I totally believe that that's the world we need to get to. But we're not there today. We're not going to get there until there are blockchains which are as computing and energy efficient as Visa and MasterCard's rails. Are we going to get there next year? I don't know. Are we going to get there in 2 years or 4 years or 16 years? I don't know. I do believe we'll get there. And so being long the notion of cryptocurrencies, I think, is a good idea. That said, today is not that day. And so to the extent that the basket of A16's crypto investments is over indexed on what are fundamentally financialized bits, as in digital information, it's no surprise that that fund would lose half of its value and that the firm would, in response, back off a little bit. Anyone who's got laser eyes in their Twitter avatar will talk to you about living through the winters. And I think they're right. You gotta live through the winters if you're a true believer. I have the benefit of living through these winters because I think I have, you know, enough BTC that's worth 100 US dollars and enough ETH that's worth 50 US dollars. I haven't looked at the value of either of these things in almost a year because I don't transact in it. When there is a thing that is worth transacting, which requires me to hold that currency, I'll get more of that currency. But I think that A16 losing a big chunk of its value might indicate that there is yet to be a thing that is really worth that currency. Ann Steele, Wall Street Journal. Spotify CEO Daniel Ek says US subscribers can expect price hikes in 2023 after recent increases by Apple and YouTube. Spotify Premium has cost $9.99 a month since 2011. Related, Dawn Chmielewski, Reuters, apologies, Dawn, if I didn't nail that on the first try. Spotify reports Q3 revenue up 21% year over year to 3.04 billion euro. MAUs up 20% year over year to 465 million versus 448.6, and premium subs up 13% year over year to 195 million. Stock drops 4% on ad growth misses. Kudos to Spotify and Daniel for putting this message out right at the same moment in time that you show that your business is still growing in meaningful ways. Top line revenue up 20%, like good. MAUs up 20%. This is the best moment in time for you to signal that the price that you have to charge in order to have a going concern for people to access the celestial jukebox without advertising is going to change for the first time in a decade. Surprise, surprise. The only thing that feels sort of personally relevant to me and feels worth saying right now, I feel like it's time for a resurgence in owning one's media. I haven't gone and looked, but Last FM, that beautiful aging Web2 bastard of a service, has been constantly listening to, or more accurately, transcribing my listening habits for years. And something tells me if I went and pulled that data and visualized it in a reasonable way, I would see that 80% of my listening is to a relatively fixed set of music. Like, I have my desert island stuff. I have the music that I go back to over and over and over again. That's not to say that there isn't a part of my brain that's motivated to go find new music. It's sort of the beauty of music. It's the most sort of user-friendly form of art, right? There's a band that I've never heard of that I could fall in love with in the next 30 days. It happens all the time. The question is it worth paying $10 a month, $11 a month, $12 a month in order to constantly have access to that experience? Or would it make more sense to pay $5 a month to have access to that experience. And then when I know what I want to do is listen to my Desert Island collection, I have that on discs that I own and control. And by discs, I mean it's all stored in my phone and it's all lives on a storage appliance in my home. I personally feel like that's the direction that I'm going to move in. Anyway, time for another set. Lauren Hirsch, New York Times. A profile of Delaware Chancery Court Judge Kathleen McCormick, who is overseeing the Elon Musk Twitter dispute ahead of the Friday deadline to close the deal. The notion that a profile, which is to say a editorialized characterization of this person who gets to make the final legally binding decision in the dispute between Twitter and Elon Musk. The notion that like that's a thing that needs to exist, and more to the point, that that's a thing that needs to exist in the final days leading up to that judge's decision being rendered, kind of makes me feel icky, kind of makes me say, hey, New York Times, is this really, like, explain to me how you are serving the public interest by informing the public about this individual human being versus you're going to tell a story about this individual human being in order to provide sort of raw meat to the people who want to have a really strong opinion about what this judge's decision may ultimately be. Whether that person in that position of power in the government of the state of Delaware should have such power. Like, I'm not putting really good shape around my idea or my feeling at the moment. Suffice it to say, I can't imagine who's going to read this New York Times profile that isn't already going into the reading of it with a point of view that they are looking to affirm. And to me, that is not the purpose of a journalistic entity. But I don't know. I'm not sure there's a whole lot more else to say on that one. Claire Duffy, CNN. LinkedIn starts letting users verify their profile with a work email address or phone number and plans to alert users if a message they receive seems suspicious. It seems to me that LinkedIn and Microsoft as its parent company understands the notion of sort of owning a vertical. There aren't a lot of other social networks which are premised on you come here in order to network with people in a professional employment capacity. Whether that employment is you are self-employed and you are representing yourself to, a market of people that may be interested in your services, maybe that's not the most traditional description of why someone would use LinkedIn, to this much more traditional definition, which is I am employed by X business and I want to represent my point of view as an employee of X business, or I am employed by X business and I am looking for employment in other areas, which is a weird space to get into because I'm not aware of any employer who's like super supportive of one of their workforce publicly communicating that they'd like to change employers, but that's a conversation for another time. This is exactly the sort of product improvement that any social media product ought to be doing. Prove your identity, authenticate in a way that is stronger than you created an account. Like, this is the way Facebook started. You could not get a Facebook account. I got my first Facebook account because I worked at Microsoft. And it was the moment where Facebook opened its user base beyond educational institutions. There's a whole other conversation to be had about the alternate timeline where Facebook didn't decide that its total addressable market was everyone on earth and instead just said, we're going to be a place where human beings that are participating in higher education can relate to one another and then move on. Imagine a world where when you graduated from university, your Facebook account was deactivated. Like, that could have been amazing. Never would have happened. So the fact that LinkedIn is authenticating is great. The fact that we're still relying on phone numbers bothers me on an individual level. I personally think phone numbers are a horrific anachronism of a bygone era. There are all manner of ways to create a real-time synchronous connection between yourself and another individual or entity. Phone numbers need to die, if for no other reason than we can get higher quality audio, to say nothing of end-to-end encrypting our communications or making it easier to connect to another individual or individuals across a wider variety of devices and circumstances, blah, blah, blah. Rad that LinkedIn is doing this. Do more of this. Other social networks follow suit. Create a path for users who are participating in good faith to prove that they are participating in good faith by expressing more about who they really are to the software. Reuters, SK Hynix warns memory chip demand faces an quote unquote unprecedented deterioration and reports Q3 2022 operating profit fell 60% year over year to around 1.15 billion amid soaring inflation. Yes, soaring inflation is a real thing. It is a macro topic that I am nowhere near well versed enough in to even have a comment. But what I can comment on is memory chip demand receding. And I can't help but look at that and see the devices that have gone into market in the last 3 years across the board are really powerful. Power is a relative thing. And so you have to look at the application of that power. what does the average human being use a laptop, a tablet, a cell phone, smartphone for? And what are the memory demands of those applications? Not a lot. Yeah, if you want to produce 8K video at 120 frames per second because you're a professional filmmaker, you need an extreme amount of memory in order to manipulate that footage through your production pipeline. I totally get that. But if you're just a human being who's out in the world taking pictures of their friends and their family and their pets, there's more than enough storage and compute power and network bandwidth to move those pieces of media around the system. And so a shrinking in demand for memory chips is exactly what ought to happen. It's not to say that I want this business to not do well. Of course they should do well. Why? They should be free to do as well as they can. But yeah, we may not need 100 gigabytes of RAM in a portable device that is going to be used to run a web browser and stream content over the wire. So maybe Apple's idea of fixing the amount of RAM, and that's not to say that, SK Hynix is exclusively in the RAM business. They may also be in the NAND flash storage business, whatever. But the decision on Apple's part to effectively eradicate the ability for the end user to replace the memory chips or the storage chips in their traditional computing products. This is why, because the life cycle of the device is well understood enough and the use cases are, quite frankly, not growing so fast that it's worth providing the end user with the ability to arbitrarily augment the device's capabilities. Time for the last set. Ben Brody, Protocol. Square's parent company Block sells access to customers' email addresses used to receive payments, which privacy experts say falls short of best practices. Falls short of best practices feels like an understatement. The notion that personally identifiable information, such as an email address, is something that is sold on a marketplace, it's not good. But do you expect better? What information do Visa, MasterCard, American Express have about you as a user of those financial rails? And what are they doing with that information? Do you know? I don't know. I just sort of take for granted that they're going to do whatever they're going to do, and that I don't experience enough of a sort of negative effect from whatever it is they may or may not be doing. I already sort of more or less subject myself to the modern panopticon. So I'm not surprised, and I don't particularly expect a lot more from any business whether it's one that's, operated by somebody as quote unquote holy as Jack Dorsey. Although, again, from all of Jack's public statements, he appears to have his heart in the right place, or in the same place that I have mine on other issues. So, what are we going to do? I tend to think this is the sort of thing that should drive us toward cryptocurrency in the mature sense, not in the sense of anything and everything is an asset which should be traded in a market in order for the holders of those assets to ultimately drive, financial returns. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I am advocating for are more straightforward examples, such as if I go to an online marketplace and I purchase the digital representation of a vintage Stussy t-shirt, like the one that I'm sure bullied my parents into affording for me from the mall in 1994. If I can go online and buy a digital representation of that shirt that can be worn by my avatar in Fortnite or in any other video game I can think of, then that's the sort of thing that blockchain-like Rails could provide for. And I think that's a good thing. The other example, which is what we're talking about here, is the ability for me as a user to accept payments from any other entity and to be unable to sell information I gain about my customers. That's also the sort of thing that you could ultimately see a cryptocurrency provide for. If I run a cafe, in today's world, am able to learn a whole lot about the individual human beings that come into my cafe every day. Should I? I'm not convinced. In a slightly alternate timeline, that same cafe could take payments for the food that it provides to its customers without also harvesting personally identifiable information. I think that's a better world. Do we need blockchains to create that world? No, we don't. But if they're the first ones to provide it at scale in a way that the average user can comprehend and interoperate with, then good, do it. Bloomberg, Seagate misses Q1 estimates with 2.04 billion in revenue and plans to cut around 3,000 jobs to reduce costs amid slowing demand. Stock drops 9.5% or more and is down 50% year to date. It's exactly the same as the SK Hynix story. Say what you will about inflation or individual buying power or other macroeconomic trends which have contributed to Seagate's, lackluster performance. If the need for storage amongst the average individual is satiated by the products that are in market today, Seagate doesn't sell as many storage products. And part of, I think, what satiates the average user's storage needs is how much of the storage is on the other side of the network. If you avail yourself of the Celestial Jukebox and you pay Spotify or Apple Music or anybody else for the privilege of being able to listen to the same 50 albums month after month after month after month after month, you don't have to store that data. The device that you purchase when your current device dies doesn't need as much storage as it would otherwise. I think that's kind of what's at play here. Again, not to say that there aren't other much larger things that are also at play, but that's the one that feels relevant to me. Lauren Good, Wired. Match Group plans to add profile verification to Hinge in November, asking users to provide a video selfie, aiming to crack down on scammers. Here we go. This is where the rubber meets the road. Social networking products that exist in the vertical where, let's face it, the purpose of the tool is to facilitate two people, maybe more than two people, meeting in physical space. In many cases, in order to create the conditions for physical human intimacy. And those tools don't have any affordances today for a user to verify that they are who they say they are, that they are who their profile photo presents them to be, that they, like, it's quite frankly, we're going to look back n number of years in the future and say, you mean to tell me that you used to go on dates and get into cars with other human beings whom you knew, about whom you had zero information which was independently verified? It is just as ludicrous as the people who would argue that self-driving cars are a thing they don't want, right? Like, I'm going to take my steering wheel out of my cold, dead hands. It's like, it's not your hands that are dead. It's the people you run over with the car. They're dead. Like, the goal here is not, it's not safe enough to have a computer operate a vehicle until there's a 0% chance that somebody's going to die. The goal is we've cut the number of deaths by an order of magnitude, or two, or three. And yeah, that's maybe feels orthogonal to this conversation, but it's like the hindsight effect is the same. And the hindsight effect with Hinge is going to be, oh, well, I felt comfortable going on this date with this person because I had verification that they really are who they say they are, that they really are an upstanding, uh, uh, trustworthy, respectful member of society, because other users in the system helped verify their identity, because state agencies were able to verify their identity. I mean, today you could be matched with someone who claims to have a job they don't really have, live in a town they don't really live, uh, uh, know people they don't really know, and there are no affordances for disproving any of those things. It's madness. And so all I can say is like Hinge had better go extraordinarily fast and hard in this direction, because the fact that there isn't a rash of systematic abuse in dating products, social networks, I think is frankly just like, it's either dumb luck or it's already there and it's not being reported. And so, if I could say anything else, it's like, I believe Lauren Good to be a tremendous journalist, and someone who could absolutely chase down a story like this. Go find out the degree to which the absence of user verification mechanisms is allowing for significant abuse inside of Hinge's network or any of its competitors' networks. Not because you want to throw Hinge under the bus, because you need to raise the floor on what that experience is. Otherwise, what are any of us doing here? Amos Igodaro, apologies if I didn't nail that one. Bloomberg, an interview with Kickstarter CEO Everett Taylor, appointed in September, on running the company as a black man, future plans, overcoming bias, and more. This arguably is the sort of profile that like the world does need. We need even more sunlight on what does it mean to be someone who doesn't present the way I do, who's in charge of a major business. Like more of that, more representation. Kids who have zero accrued mental model for culture need to see people who look like them in positions of power. Good thing. The only other interesting thing, though, for me is Kickstarters as a business, like that sector. I don't know what its future is, and the only reason I say that is my posit is that those businesses are only able to flourish in a world where capital is cheap and the supply chain has zero friction. And the more expensive capital gets and the more friction in the supply chain increases, the worse it is for businesses like Kickstarter, because they operate at scale, right? Because what causes Kickstarter to succeed is not 1x the number of projects successfully funded, it's 2x, 4x, 16x. It's growing that total pie. And you can go back through the sort of archives of a site like The Verge or Twitter or anywhere else. The the history of businesses like Kickstarter is littered with the bodies of projects that looked really great and never got anywhere. And some percentage of those didn't get anywhere because of fraud. There's no question about that. Some percentage of them, though, didn't get anywhere because it turns out like making real shit is difficult. And is there a place in the sort of broader market for entities like Kickstarter? 100%. If somebody wants to create a new brand, like a a new concoction of moisturizer, body oil, and put that out into the world because they have a point of view on what's good for the human body relative to what's already on the shelf, Kickstarter is a great place for a business like that because it's a way that you can gauge market interest and achieve some level of crowdfunding such that you can reach economies of scale. Keep doing it. Like, it needs to exist. But the harder it is to get the ingredients for your body oil because you don't own and control the entire stack that produces those ingredients, which is to say, the greater your reliance on the global supply chain, you may wind up making promises that your business can't ultimately cash. So, I don't know. I'm glad that Kickstarter exists. I'm glad it's being run by a person who doesn't look like me. Um, uh, but I'll be curious to see how that business performs over the next year, the next 5 years. Does it limp along, or does it mature and refine itself? Because it needs to exist, and to the extent that it needs to exist, it should be stronger and more durable, like all of us. That's all I have to say.